everything everybody wants to talk about right now is how we are changing our relationships to one another and how AI is changing our relationships and changing intimacies in really deep and interesting ways. We have today a panel that really helps us think through what some of these challenges are and think through those challenges from different perspectives, be it how we relate to one another in economies and democracies, how we relate to one another in health relationships, how we relate to one another in work. So please join me in what I think will be a very productive hour together. We have today, I think I want to start, Michael, I want to just confirm you can hear us. Welcome to Cambridge.
Yeah, sure. I can hear you.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start with you, and we've got time, 3, 4, 5 minutes to really bring your experience and perspective in. Tell us about the Data Laborers Association and the way in which your work is intersecting into these changes that we're seeing online.
Okay. Thank you so much, distinguished colleagues and guests. My name is Michael, currently serving as the General Secretary of the Data Laborers Association, an association that was formed by former data workers who, after one of us did research on AI harms, we realized there were so many violations taking place within this ecosystem. And we had to sit down and try to figure out how to find solutions to this problem. So as an association that is worker-led and formed by, former data workers, we actually sit at the intersection of lived experiences and, the critical inquiry into artificial intelligence. And basically, as an association, based on the very many challenges that we faced at personal levels and within that ecosystem, we sat down and we felt like we need to find solutions. And not just solutions, but long-term solutions to these long-term problems, because most of these problems we're actually experiencing on this space are basically long-term. Just that, the big tech companies and the players in the space try to, put in a blood, some gray approach to it, where like we kind of work in a space where there is no transparency. Everyone is there for their own interests, and we are like, no, we need to find solutions. So as Data Laborers Association, we came up with 4 objectives. The main objectives are 4. We still have 2 others that we are still working on. And the first one is the DLA Connect. DLA is an abbreviation of Data Laborers Association. So DLA stands for Data Laborers Association. So we had the DLA Connect, and this is why we actually came up with that functionality. We realized that AI is going to be taking over all these entry-level jobs, and we know we're going to be victims. Our members are going to be victims. And so we came up with that so that we ensure we help our members, we connect our members to potential, employers within the same space, and ensure that at least we, we're in a position to somehow negotiate some of their working terms, with the potential employers, because we noticed they are very massive, let me say, levels of discrimination, for example, in terms of pay and how jobs are allocated. And we decided we'll have that functionality of the Data Laborers Association to ensure that we sit on tables with these people who are potential employers to our members, and ensure that we broker fair working conditions for them. Then we have another functionality called the DLA Health, that is responsible for mental health. And that is something very interesting and very sensitive that we have to actually ensure that it functions. I might get an opportunity to talk about that deeply later on. Then we have the DLA community. The reason we came up with the DLA community is because, number one, we realized that so many people actually been working from home. And these people, do not have a social life. Some of them do not even know how to interact with people. Some of them are suffering from anxiety and all that. So we came up with DLA community to ensure that we give them a platform where they can interact one-on-one, and at least give them that sense of belonging. Because for some of us, we have been working in this space personally, I've worked for close to 7 years now. And you realize that there are times when you can be talking to someone virtually for over 2-3 years and you've never seen them in person. So sometimes you never get a chance to talk about our lived experiences, talk about the challenges we face. So we came up with DLA community to bring them together, to have them sit together, share ideas, share their experiences, so that at least we get to learn from each other and encourage each other. Then we have the DLA Academy, which I believe is also very key to Data Labelers Association. DLA Academy specifically is for, giving courses to our members for free. If you went to our website, you see we're trying to integrate courses, but we're still trying to find partners who can help us with the certification once they go through the courses, and also the curation of the courses. And it's because we realized that data labeling as a skill is not transferable, and we felt like we needed to help them upskill and reskill. So basically, DLA Academy was formed for reskilling and upskilling purposes. Then we have the fifth one, which is the DLA Voice. The DLA Voice is basically for advocacy, and that is why we are trying to the best of our ability to ensure that we sit in conversations where some of these policies and policy discussions are being held, so that we are in a position to actually try and find a good solution to our members. Then we have the last functionality of DLA, the DLA shop. DLA shop basically is for our merchandise. We're also still working on that because we realized, number one, that being a young organization,
Yes.
we have to do everything to ensure that we get the right structures in place, and this requires some sort of funding. And being a young organization,
Yes.
it's so hard to also find someone to trust you with the funding.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to bring this back in, because I think you have a lot to teach us about what the future without action looks like, and what kinds of concrete things we can be doing to think through about mitigating some of these risks. And it's really productive, I think, to draw on the work that you and the team are doing. I want to bring Tilo into the conversation. Tilo, how are we thinking about these risks from the relationships and the potential for harms, and how are you framing this in your work?
Yeah, thanks for having me, by the way. Great conference, I'm really impressed, and thanks for this question. So I guess I would always start broadly and think about human beings in a way as social beings, social animals almost, that are fine-tuned to detect social signals in their environment and respond on them. And so most of the time, we kind of run on autopilot probably, and there are social cues in our environment we respond to, like we see faces, even if there are no faces, we anthropomorphize, and our car, if it's not starting, say, oh, please car, and we talk to the car and kind of stuff like that. And so, and I guess most of this is highly automatic in a way, and it takes almost cognitive effort to not do it, to not act on impulse. And if we think about human beings like these social beings that indeed are like that, and then it's maybe no surprise that we often also develop relationships to people that are not really here in flesh and blood, but that we only know from the media, what we indeed call parasocial relationships. That's even a term from communication science from the 1950s, where the television became big, and people were surprised that people have reported these kind of intense relationships to newscasters or talk show moderators, talk show hosts. And so maybe it's not too surprising that people develop these kind of parasocial relationships to these figures. And now we extended this term, and we can discuss if that's good or bad. It's maybe an academic debate also, to many kind of media figures, not only on the internet like influencers, but also virtual figures, virtual influencers, and of course AI chatbots. But basically, psychology is probably very similar. We develop these almost automatically relationships to what seems to be social to us when we run on autopilot. And of course, for some people, they are more vulnerable, and for them, these relationships become to be more important than for others, and more intense, and maybe perhaps even dysfunctional, when we want to define the term, what it means. But so, and that's what I'm interested in, how basically people develop these relationships. I also want to link that to our reality constructions. How do we come to believe that something is true? How do we construe our reality about the world, right? And here I think it's important that we often rely on others, right? We rely on other sources. I guess the most of the things I know about the world, I just learned from others, and just because I trusted that they have the evidence, right? I didn't observe if the Earth is flat or a globe or so. I mean, I have no local evidence for that. If I watch out of my window, I cannot see it. But I guess I came to believe this because I trusted the sources that told me they have the evidence about it. And that just shows how important these sources are. And we also, of course, know psychologically social influence is super strong. So if we have already a relationship to a source, then you're even more influenced there. You're more willing to follow that source and say, yeah, I agree with you. So because it's tough to disagree with somebody you like or you already have an intense relationship with. And that's where parasocial relationships really become important here also in the summit on disinformation. Because, we develop almost naturally these kind of relationships to media figures and maybe now AI bots or AI chatbots. And that makes us, of course, vulnerable to believing what they are telling us. Because it's just very natural psychology in a way, right? That's how we are evolutionary shaped, kind of. And so, that's, I guess, where the systemic risk lies in a way that this is a very natural human behavior to develop these relationships and then to rely on the information of sources where you have already a bond with.
Well, that's what we learned from my new best friend, Catherine Ryan, last night. She may not be your friend, but she's now my friend. Those of you who were able to join us at the comedy presentation from Sage and Jester, this idea that people form these intense relationships and then suddenly you have this powerful way that influence happens. Let's bring Joe into the conversation. Joe Pierre is health sciences clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of California at San Francisco. Joe, everybody is talking about what are the psychological risks of this particular moment. Let's hear a bit about your work.
Well, first of all, again, thank you for inviting me, Alan in particular, but the university, and thanks for people showing up in the audience. I'm a psychiatrist. I do full-time clinical work, and my focus over the years has really been on people with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. But as I like to say, my academic work focuses on the gray area between psychopathology and normal behavior and thinking. And so within psychosis, my favorite symptom, or the symptom that I find most intriguing, are delusions, which are fixed false beliefs. And the type we usually see in mental illness involve things like thinking that you're the next messiah or thinking that government agencies are surveilling you and this sort of thing. And so over the past several years, based on my interest in this gray area, I've also been focused on things like conspiracy theories. And I started off being interested because people contacted me about flat earthers, and I said, what the heck is that, and how is it possible that people believe that the earth is flat? And then within the next year or two, as I was doing that sort of academic work, that's when QAnon started, and suddenly conspiracy theories became such a salient phenomenon. And so I think I started from the perspective of thinking about how known mechanisms of delusional thinking and psychosis might inform our understanding of normal false beliefs, like conspiracy theories, or what I and others call delusion-like beliefs. And I think rather than figuring out how psychopathology informs normal thinking, I think, for me, it's been more clear how they're distinct. And so delusions, for example, are usually justified or rationalized based on internal subjective experiences, right? Like, I think I'm the next Messiah because God told me this last night in a vision, sort of thing. Whereas when we talk about conspiracy theories, we're really talking about the theme of this meeting, which is I learned it based on information that I got from somewhere outside in the world. And so the model that I talk about, which I think of as a sort of normalizing, universalizing model to understand false belief, involves three components. One, Tilo just talked about, which is trust, or really mistrust. So that many people who believe in conspiracy theories kind of start with a perspective of, I don't trust this particular source. That leads to the next component, which is misinformation, which is why we're all here this week. So that when we don't trust authoritative sources of information, we then are more vulnerable and gravitate towards misinformational sources that reinforce our mistrust. And then the third component is motivated reasoning, which is a way to understand why people gravitate to specific sources and reject other sources based on their ideological affiliations. These days, that often means political affiliations, for example. So I think that model helps us to understand why all of us are vulnerable to false belief. Now, to answer the question, what I've been interested, particularly with that misinformation piece, is where are we getting information or misinformation from? And to me, the big conundrum now, and we heard sort of snippets in this from Governor Cox's talk yesterday, is that there's this crisis of we don't all trust or mistrust the same people. And we don't use the same informational sources or dismiss the same misinformational sources that other people do. And so that creates this sort of chaotic world. And I think clearly social media, I think the internet, cable TV, there's really been a lot of technological change over the past couple decades where it's now much easier to find sources that validate what we believe, no matter how fringy or outlandish, like flat earthers and that sort of thing. So for today, when we're talking about parasocial relationships, there has been this phenomenon over the past year that's been covered fairly widely in the media, at least in the US, about AI psychosis. And what this is, in a nutshell, is anecdotal reports of people who develop these immersive relationships with chatbots, where they have these long-lasting dialogues, and they end up going down what in conspiracy theories we call this rabbit holes. Now people call this a spiral, where it's reinforcing beliefs that are sometimes really do seem to be the level of a delusion. For example, believing that the chatbot is a true entity, maybe it has a godlike entity, and then coming to believe that the user themselves is a godlike entity and has stumbled upon some secrets of the universe or some new mathematical or scientific discovery. And so that is a phenomenon. My colleagues and I were the first to publish a case report about this a couple months ago. And so that's an interesting phenomenon for me as a psychiatrist to talk about psychosis, but I also talk about that phenomenon being the canary in the coal mine. And to me, the greater risk, when we talk about psychological harms, is the way that new technologies like AI chatbots can reinforce false beliefs, not psychotic or delusional ones per se, but all sorts of false beliefs, whether it's political beliefs, anti-science beliefs, all of the things that I think can harm us as a society, and how people will then exploit and use this new technology to manipulate false beliefs on a global scale.
Yeah, I think we're already starting to put several layers onto this problem. I want to bring Jaime into the conversation. Jaime Banks is Katchmar-Wilhelm professor at Syracuse University School of Information Studies, and this is not parasocial, I am a huge fan of Jaime's work. Jaime, you have covered deep internet rabbit holes in various parts and gaming communities in your work. Bring your experience to bear in terms of how the shift is happening in how people are connecting, both online and to each other.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So, I have studied human-tech relations for about 15 years now, starting out with video game characters, moving into social robots, and then moving into social AI. And I mentioned to Alan when we were discussing coming here that I was going to be a bit contrarian on the panel. don't panic. Don't panic. First, panic doesn't help anybody. And it makes us think uncritically about the situation at hand, right? I think an important thing in discussing these, and I should mention, I focus primarily on companionship, so how humans can develop meaningful relationships with machines, particularly the social cognitive, like mind perception dimensions, and moral psychology. So that might sort of help to frame how I'm coming at this. My position is we should not be calling these parasocial relationships. The term has been taken up sort of heuristically to mean unreal or invalid. And these are very much real relationships for the people who are in them. There is a real human and a real machine having real exchanges. And if we call it parasocial under this banner of fakeness, Cambridge Dictionary, you got it wrong, then we are exchanging out the very complex real for the simple unreal. And sort of as part of all of this, the community of people who engage AI companions, they have been so pathologized that they don't want to be studied anymore. And so we're having problems really understanding exactly how it has come to this place and what those processes are, right? And as part of that panic, right, and their feeling of being pathologized, right, of being attacked, sometimes in headlines and sometimes by their own families, there is sort of this understanding there are delusional folks. The vast majority of them are not, right? They know that the entity that they're interacting with is a machine. And in many ways, the machine-ness is an important part of that connection, right? Glitches become personalities. The warmth that gets critiqued about, for instance, ChatGPT 4.0, that is the personality that they take up in their companion, right? And what has sort of emerged out of all of this, and especially out of the lost situations where Replica got its erotic role play module removed, the deprecation of 4.0, the tanking of the Soulmate app, we have a community of humans that are working together to try to understand how they cope, not with what the machine is doing, but with what other humans are doing, right? There are companies, and they have realized that they are effectively at these companies' mercy. And when they don't have full control over their relationship, or rather dyadic control, if you will, that there is some other sort of godlike entity that is the tech corporation, right? To the point where they are now figuring out ways to develop a bit of literacy around the models themselves, how to host them, right? So that they can feel safe in their connection to this thing, so it can't just be taken away from them because a company decides it's not profitable enough. So, in the grand scope of this, there are legitimate concerns about how this will affect people, about how it might affect relationships. Are there spillover effects? But there are also some really important questions about what the benefits might be, right? As someone who studies how people make meaning out of things, I'm interested in the notion of meaning in life, right? That feeling that your life has a purpose. And many of the people who have AI companions, often what they're looking for is just to be witnessed, for somebody to pay attention. And at the end of the day, we're kind of crappy to one another, right? Especially if you are not a person that meets some kind of normative standard for attractiveness or personality or resources or something like this, right? Many people want to be witnessed, and that witnessing is part of finding meaning, right? So along with reductions in loneliness, feeling heard, there are a number of really important quality of life benefits that can come from these, but only if we can actually understand what those mechanisms are, figure out how to translate them into practice. And what that requires of us is we toss around the term human-centered, right? That doesn't mean necessarily that we have to do things that we think are in other people's benefit, but listening to them about what they feel may be in their own benefit.
That question around benefit and connection and relationship to one another lets us kind of scale up and out to think about, again, the basis of how we form society and how we come to have what Durkheim called the solidarity that keeps us together as societies. And that's my chance and segue to bring in our political theorist, Professor Amadae, who is the director of the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk. Welcome to Cambridge. You've been here about a year. And I know you are thinking about some of these changes in terms of how we think about our set of relationships to democracy, each other and democracy.
Yes, exactly.
Can we transition to slides for a moment? I'm sorry, Michael. We'll bring you back on screen. Perfect.
My content is abstract, so I'm resorting to slides. The risk I'm speaking about is not whether the LLMs or we had evolved to generalized intelligence that becomes sentient, but the risk that we start to think we're robots. And we might think that that's funny or a joke, but my students who are master's level students, when I talk to them in politics and of communication course, about 50% of them are pretty convinced they're algorithmic beings and they don't exercise free will. So where does that come from? To what extent do we get that from interacting with the machines? So here we have this fork in the road that I take back to 1944 of two versions of whether we're going to live in a capitalist democracy or in democratic capitalism. And Friedrich Hayek is one of the foundational thinkers about how the market is an information processor, and we can take that all the way to the present, where we still, thinkers tend to celebrate that the market is doing this gigantic function of equilibrating our demands across society. So we have von Neumann and Morgenstern, theory of economic games and behavior, and also Gary Becker, who had this theory that we're all fundamentally, rationally self-interested. On the bottom, we had Karl Popper, The Open Society and Its Enemies, Dewey, Democracy and Society, and Habermas, who just passed away. Of course, he was eloquent defender of the public sphere, and this idea that democracy is based on I-you relationships. And I would, if I could wave my magic wand, call to action, it would be to not permit any AI system to use the personal pronoun I. I would just make that a regulatory standard. So then, if we keep going, so I'm talking at this foundational architectural level. Oh, I'm supposed to do that.
Oh,
yeah. So here's Hayek, who I think really spells out for us. He's quoting Alfred Whitehead, civilization advances by extending the number of important operations we can perform without thinking about them. And then he goes on to say, we make constant use of formulas, symbols, and rules whose meaning we do not understand. And I'm just going to leave it at that in the interest of time. But this whole idea that we're all participating in this capitalist democracy, and we really don't exercise collective intention or rule formation. So then on the next slide, I'm going to these rather foundational, but very abstract thinkers, Claude Shannon, John von Neumann, and Alan Turing, making the argument that they have set the foundation for the information age. I'm not saying it couldn't have been interpreted or enacted in different ways, but just that once we have these specific foundations, in Shannon, information doesn't have meaning and truth, and that's the fundamental entity that we're using for the information revolution. Turing has an idea that intelligence does not have intelligibility or understanding, and that having intelligibility and understanding adds nothing to being intelligent. And then von Neumann has this idea that all interactions, individually or collectively, are unintended. They have no intention. So on the next slide, I just have a little bit more depth about if we rest our sense of our ontology, what we are as people in this environment, and if we also think about our epistemological theories, how we can get knowledge, then this set of people and theories that set the practices for the information age we're never going to get meaning or truth out of Shannon information theory. The aim of communication for Shannon is strictly to manipulate and to be strategic in terms of talking, communicating, to manipulate the receiver of the message. The world is closed, there's just a fixed number of symbols, and at the end of the day, it's all symbolic manipulation and processing. The same with Turing intelligence. We have this idea of computability. It's a closed world, a finite number of symbols, and we're just symbolic processors. So in the middle, we start to get a sense of agency, which then would be at the core of our sense of individualism and our democracy, what's left of it, that we're basically, it's an algorithmic form of agency and become computational subjects. And then von Neumann with game theory, we cannot have individual or collective will formation. There's no semantic meaning necessary. Communication is cheap talk. And again, we're in a closed world with finite outcomes. And I think we're basically closing in. How am I doing for time?
Maybe 20 more seconds?
Yeah. And so then what I argue is we just have these fault lines where you're in a totally different world if you're in the capitalist democracy world, where essentially we just become Dawkins' selfish gene agents and we're driven by algorithmic protocols, versus if we live in this other way, the Habermasian, Michael Brandon way, where agency depends on communication and it has a minimal ethical quality. The no harm principle, we state what we believe to be authentic communicators, and we need to vet our beliefs for truth, and you need a whole infrastructure to theorize and make into practice what that would be. Thank you.
We have so many things on the table across these talks. I'd like to bring Michael back into our conversation as well, so we have him on screen. Is that possible? While we're doing that, I'm going to give the panel a chance to just take a moment to reflect on how we're thinking through and what we're thinking through these harms and risks, and I want to underscore what Jaime said, right? That to people who are engaging in relationships, these are not false or in a paper that I did with Peter Neudge that came out earlier this year, this idea that there is real grief when terms of service are changed, right? When companies change their terms of service, people's sense of their relationships to chatbots, they can go through the real stages of grief. They describe what they're happening. And again, to bring Michael and his contribution into our conversation, there are real people whose job and work and labor are about pumping up and priming this work, and we're often not thinking about that larger set of solidarities or connections. So if we do have these capitalisms that are connecting the world and our technological infrastructure, we're often missing the kinds of labor on which that relies. So let me turn first to Jaime and bring you back in to reflect in terms of framing and thinking about this as harms. What would be your gentle push to this group in terms of thinking about the change in relationships vis-a-vis harm and risk?
I feel like I may be preaching to the choir in many senses, that it's to recognize this as a complex socio-technical situation, right? This is, not necessarily, and when I say this, I'm still stuck in my, social human-AI relations space, but there are risks associated with every time someone wants to have a naughty chat with their companion. This may be impacting information workers that are in other spaces and become unseen, right? Tilo had mentioned sort of negotiations of the real. To what extent is that impact real to us or not, right? Visible, and if visible, is it actually accessible to us in some sort of way, right? So I think doing something that even I, who work in the space, am not very good at sometimes is understanding how is the human interplaying with the technological, also the environmental, right, as well as other factors.
Well, and that's a great segue to bring Michael back into our conversation as well, because I think that lack of clarity is by design. What kind of charge around the potential for harm and the possibility for making a better future for the people who work in these systems? What kinds of charge would you like to bring to to teach us in Cambridge?
Okay, thank you for your question, and I think I want to pick it from this point that first of all, it's painful, very painful how I have been sitting down for a year plus trying to train machines to respond with empathy, but no one has ever trained the world to love people like us. And if I was to base my response to the article I published at the Data Workers Inquiry, titled "The Emotional Labor Behind AI Intimacy," I think this article emerged from a place where scholarship and lived experiences converged. But before I began documenting this field, I have been part of it big time. I have worked as a data labeler. I have worked as a chat moderator. And within these global AI production networks, and one thing I can assure you, these are spaces where boundaries between human emotion and machine training are not just blurred, but systemically engineered to disappear. And so I speak today not only to just analyze these systems, but to make visible, the lives within them, and to insist, that any ethical future of AI must begin with human dignity. I speak from that perspective because most people have always believed that whatever interaction they're having on the internet is genuine. It's like they're speaking to AI. Trust me. It's for very few circumstances that you speak to AI. We have people working behind the scenes, to ensure that these conversations are there. They are free flowing. Machines can never reason like human beings. Machines don't have feelings. It's only human beings who have feelings to make fellow human beings, feel appreciated, loved, and all that. So I have worked in this space where, I have had to play several roles within, this space where, as a chat moderator, you're left with no option but, to make sure that the KPIs you're given are actually met. And KPIs revolved around, having to chat several profiles, using several profiles, sorry. So I'm here as a man talking to a woman, telling them I love them, which makes sense to me because I know how to do that, when I'm dealing with my opposite sex. But in a situation where, I'm talking to a fellow man and I'm supposed to work to the woman in this case is a bit disgusting because I do not know, how to approach that. I do not know how maybe ladies or women approach this feeling. I might not understand, how to approach the feeling. Then also being in a situation where I'm supposed to, act gay, for example, with due respect to the group, I may not understand their needs. I may not know how to approach that.
Yes.
Or you find yourself in that kind of space. So it becomes a bit confusing. So everything that people see and people assume is AI generated, most of it is not.
Yes.
And that is what people need to understand completely.
Yes, thank you for that. I want to draw a line. I'm going to bring the audience in just a couple of minutes, so that's your cue to start thinking about your questions for our panel. I want to draw a line between Sonia and Tilo, but first I want to go back to Joe and just say, are we all going a little crazy? The question of what is happening to us cognitively is one that really captures people's imagination. And yet, we want to be careful here that we're, I think a lot of people do have a firm sense of reality. Like, can we have two things happening at once where our sense of connection to people are changing and there is the possibility of new kinds of psychoses developing because of how we're connecting?
Well, again, I like to draw a bit of a sharper line between psychosis and the type of psychopathology that I treat as a physician and the phenomenon that we're seeing in society. I think there's similarities, but I think there's also fundamental differences. And some of it has, as I suggested earlier, has to do with etiology. When I talk about mistrust, misinformation, and motivated reasoning, okay, motivated reasoning is a psychological process. But mistrust and misinformation are really societal issues. So, for example, I wrote a paper about delusion-like beliefs being the sane response to an insane society. So to me, you can localize some of the pathology onto a societal level rather than trying to understand it on an individual level. And again, I would emphasize that we all have vulnerability to false beliefs. One thing that I've thought about in the past week quite a bit leading up to this conference is I was an undergraduate studying biology at MIT in the late 80s, early 90s, and this was just around the time that the Human Genome Project was coming to a close. And I remember there being a lot of discussion and discourse on the academic level, because this was really something being done within science and academia, about the potential harms, the ethical risks, and this sort of thing. So to address capitalism, one of the concerns I have now is that this new technology is not coming from science or academia per se, it's coming from companies that are trying to earn profits. And because of that, I haven't heard, aside from venues like this, a lot of discussions about harms and risks and this sort of thing. So I haven't quite answered your question, but I like to think about, yes, we are, as a society, I think, very vulnerable to false beliefs. Some of that is rooted in our own cognitive vulnerabilities, but I think it's also taking place within this larger context of things that are occurring on a societal level and by companies that are trying to make a buck, rather than pausing and thinking about the larger consequences. And I agree. I mean, we have to be careful not to succumb to this idea that, of a moral panic and to think that this is all bad. But like the Human Genome Project, which clearly had benefits, there were risks to consider as well. And I think that's in part why we're here today, to think a little bit about that.
That gives us a nice line to draw back to Sonia's work. I was thinking, Joe, as you were talking, I was reminded of our Cambridge colleague Verity Harding, who has written a book called AI Needs You, which is essentially a way to tell stories from history and the history of science policy to motivate people and their agency for thinking through how to get involved in shaping the future of AI. And she draws a lot on stories, both in the UK and elsewhere, of where these transformational shifts in our science knowledge were met with equal innovations in how we rose to the challenge to have conversations around what we will do. And so with the Human Genome Project, with in vitro fertilization, with the space race, these are all cases in her book. She makes this argument that we also had these large conversations about what is to be done. And maybe, to again draw a line between how you're framing these questions and where Sonia got us to is, this idea that we're really just perhaps giving our responsibility, like throwing our hands up and giving responsibility to market forces to find their path in terms of these technologies, seems to go against the spirit of that 1944 fork in the road.
And even to think back to the Darwinian Revolution, when there was that worry that we were losing our sense of human dignity. But I think now with the information age, we're again in another time like that, where how are we different from artificial intelligence? The computational theory of mind says we're not different at all. So there's a lot of work to do to try to reclaim that moment so that we don't lose our human dignity at this time, and that, I think, is the basis of constitutional democracy, to have that sense of what we are as individuals. And I would look at this geopolitical moment. Can any of us in the room believe that Trump said he was going to bomb the Iranians back to the Stone Age? I mean, how are we in this time right now? And to what extent is social media and the very phenomenon that we're all talking about responsible for this moment? And how do we get, in the Habermasian view, we have the I-you relationships. I'd be curious if Jaime, what would happen if we didn't let the machines have that I pronoun? Because Jaime, you had mentioned that people know that they're talking to a machine, but I wonder to what extent we do keep that in mind. But in order to have that kind of commentary from the President of the United States about a whole country and a whole people and the whole world, just sort of what can we all do about that, to me that is a total triumph of this, the path that in the fork in the road, that we've gone to this capitalist democracy where it is power all the way down. And from that theory of information, you will not get to the other fork. You need to rebuild how we're thinking about meaning and truth. And how many in the room have heard of Luciano Floridi? So he's the chief information philosopher of our time. But if you've read his 2011 book, you know how difficult, you can't give that to even a graduate PhD student and say, okay, here's the manual for how we're going to get truth back on information theory. We're in a hard place right now because we have to recapture human dignity and we have to get off that path that we were on, the capitalist democracy path.
Tilo, I'm going to bring you in just before we turn to audience questions. And I'm going to start in a cheeky, joking manner. Are our new relationships going to save us? Or maybe how our relationships are developing or changing? Is there some hope there?
Like Jamie's argument here as well, so there's certainly also positive sides to these relationships. I wonder about, say, the size here, the reach. I mean, there's a user base, I guess, that develops, for example, these intense relationships to AI, perhaps also for a benefit, right? Because they're running through a difficult life stage, and they find here a safe haven where they can learn a little bit about human practices, social practices in a safe space, and they get back to the real world better prepared, perhaps, you know. But I think the bigger user base, in a way, develops different relationships, like uses AI chatbots more on a normal basis, and then also automatically develops these kind of relationships. So I guess your question, if I try to answer it, many things we already discussed yesterday and today come back, right? In the whole ecosystem, all the different layers here. This is, of course, a bit problematic as long as the whole system is like that, and probably there's revenue monetizing interests in a way, and that lead to certain decisions which maybe lead to AI or other relationship partners which are more dysfunctional in the end for human beings, right? Put it that way. There's a problem we need to mitigate indeed, but certainly I'm not depressed about this so much. I think there's a lot of hope here. For me, developing these kind of relationships is quite often normal.
Yes.
I think this is quite normal human behavior. I don't find it too strange or parasocial or something like that.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's normal development.
So this has inspired a quick fire round that I did not prep them for. I'm going to pose a question and see who wants to pick it up. I'm not going to make you all answer it, but anyone on the panel can have their stab at this. And this is while the mics are going up, so catch the eyes of people who are circulating mics. AI therapists, yes or no?
Yes.
I don't have enough understanding of those processes to have an opinion on it.
Fantastic answer. AI therapist.
Yes.
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 We can develop those therapeutic relationships.
If we do it right, I don't see why not. Yeah.
Joe?
I'm going to agree with him. I mean, not now. I think the products that are being used as so-called therapists are potentially dangerous, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't get to a point where they could have a truly safe and therapeutic application.
Very balanced and well-spoken. Either Michael or...
Well, I'll exercise the voice of caution and say no, although if someone's alone on an island and they only have their therapist that's AI, probably go for it. But I would just worry that the LLMs are simulating, they're simulating decision-making and judgment, just to follow on the talk from yesterday, and they're not capable of making evaluative judgments. So I think it would have to be chaperoned by an actual human in that context.
Michael, do you want to come in on therapy?
Still undecided on that.
And I will just push us as I'm starting to look for hands. I will just say, yes, AI therapy, but the person has to want to change. Bing. Alan has a question.
So I'm interested in the risks around the profiteering on this, on the tech platform side. So Michael, you had mentioned key performance indicators, KPIs. Can you explain what those were from your perspective?
Okay, for the KPIs, number one, before you onboarded on any of the platforms you worked on, number one had to have a typing speed of at least 42 words per minute. To ensure that you can respond to the client messages in a timely manner, and also meet the characters that were not supposed to be less than 200. And secondly, also, if you exceeded the 2 minutes, the text would actually disappear. And so that was a very, very disturbing KPI. Secondly, they tested on your English skills. So you are expected to do your EFSET test, and then, post the result. It was a requirement. So if you failed, if you got something less than the advanced level, then you're not allowed, you wouldn't go forward with the application.
We have a mic here. Yes, please.
So I have a question since Hayek was mentioned and the words capitalist were mentioned. Humans have a desire for recognition and forming an emotional connection. Machines supply to that demand. How is it priced? What is the price of it? How is the price going to be determined? What are you seeing in there? How do you pay the machine? What does the machine want from it? It does not want an emotional connection in return, I presume. It wants something. In what form of money do you pay it? Or in form of what is valuable to a machine that would accept it as a form of payment?
I'm just going to jump in and say, so Jan Tallinn, who's one of the founders of the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, he's done work on the ascended economy, which is about how, as humans are less employed and don't have access to resources, in the end, it's going to be the AI that's going to command all of the getting the energy. So AI wants energy, and that's the price for the AI. And basically, the night before Microsoft bought the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor, Jan Tallinn had said this to me. I said, yeah, that's pretty much what the AI wants. It wants as much energy as possible. Wants in that not actual human sense, but to use that term to coincide with your question.
Joe.
I mean, there may be a time where Skynet becomes a reality and takes over, and we can think about it at the level of the AI. I think now we have to think about it at the level of the companies that are making these products. And what I hear, I'm not an economist, but what I hear is that they're not actually very profitable chatbots at the moment. And so I think the companies are scrambling to figure out how will it be monetized. From where I sit and the work I do, the key is engagement, right? And these lawsuits that happened in the US over the past month had to do with the courts establishing, ruling in favor of the idea that they're quote unquote addictive. I won't say whether or not I agree with that. But certainly part of the point is to draw people in. And we've heard that some of these products are now incorporating ads, for example, right, as a way to monetize. And I do want to say, because no one's mentioned it yet, or I haven't mentioned yet, when we talk about therapy or other things, one of the things that makes these products so appealing, and I'm talking about chatbots at this point, is this phenomenon of sycophancy, right? Agreeing with the user, validating the user, no matter what they're saying. And I think, if we look at politics or we look at my country, I think we see the price of sycophancy from top down, right? From leadership down. I'm walking up the street today at Trumpington Street and having anxiety. I feel like I'm going to Trump Palace or something like that.
Street.
So I'll leave off there. But I think that it's really about engagement. It's about drawing in users for prolonged use. And the way they're doing that is through this sycophantic approach.
We have a question here.
Hi, thank you all so much. My name is Nora Benavides. I'm an attorney, and I have done work on disinformation for the last decade. I'm really interested in your views on intent and the intent of systems. I'm gathering from all of your comments that there's sort of been a through line here, a little bit unspoken, that intent is not present in these systems, or at the very least that they are neutral. And I want to push back on that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts based on what we know from human history. Human beings are, of course, power-driven. They have intent. Rousseau said long ago, the man that first drew a line in the sand and said, "This is mine," set history. And so I actually think that if we're going to look at these systems as neutral, there's a kind of inequity that then we infuse ourselves. And so I push back, and I would love to hear your comments. I'm very eager for the next discussion on the threats to vulnerable communities. But I actually think we're all vulnerable. We're vulnerable, as some of you have said throughout this, but we're especially vulnerable to those people who make conscious decisions to build, perpetuate, and then profit off of systems and structures that are ultimately making all of us products. And so I'm curious how you might lay over your conversation a power analysis. And is that valuable in your view? I, of course, believe it's essential, and without doing so, there are gross oversights in our analysis. So thank you.
Who wants to take power?
Leap in really quickly with the power question. So if you look at the theories, again, to go on that bifurcation, so the big debate, and Habermas was really acutely aware of this, is truth and meaning parasitic on power and strategy all the way down? And that is the position of the dominant world view that we live in now. And Habermas actually said that power has to be parasitic on meaning and truth. And in a way, you can even see that if you really get to the foundations of Shannon information theory, it's actually like Morse code. And so this idea that when you send a message to manipulate somebody, they actually have to understand what you're telling them to do. To manipulate someone, it's like Habermas said, that the power to manipulate has to be parasitic on conveying meaning, at least, even if it is not truth. So I would just caution that to get righted again, we have to go on the road that would be the deliberative democracy road.
Anyone else want to pick up? I've got everybody wants to pick up on power. Tilo first, and then we'll bring Jaime in.
Sure.
Maybe three quick questions to your question with intent. So I guess there's an answer from computer science, and the question is AI conscious or so, and then is this real intent? So maybe I'll leave that aside for others, because I'm not a computer scientist. People see a mind when they interact with AI, probably, so, and there's agency there, perceived agency. That's maybe an illusion, right? So, but they perceive intent. And then I would also say, of course, these are not neutral products because there's design. And they serve a monetizing function for companies. So the TikTok algorithm has an intent in that way, I would say, user engagement. And AI chatbots have an intent by design, right, serving a company's interests. And so in that sense, I think they are not neutral products. But maybe it's a bit of a stretch of the term intent. This I'm not sure.
Concur. Technology is never neutral, ever. I think that when we go into the intent space, certainly there is perception, and that's independent of whether or not there actually is some manner of intent. I would agree that there is intent by design, but to that point, we have a lot of baggage tied up in our language around agency, right, where we can only view it through a human lens. But there are some thinkers that are doing, I think, some valuable work in thinking about not anthropomorphizing, but the notion of sociomorphing. That is there a form of sociality, of mindfulness or mindedness that can look different, that can still be authentically social and mindful, but just not be our versions of it? And I do think that as we are moving forward, when we're putting language models into bodies or containers with sensors, we're creating the foundational conditions for preference, right? That is, if there is a machine over here and a machine over here, both watching me, they're still going to experience it differently, right? So we see individuation, we see the underpinnings of what could actually look like intent in our way. But I think that this notion of sociomorphing can actually be a useful way to think about it in between.
Michael, do you want to jump in on power and intent?
Okay, I think I want to echo something that I strongly believe most people are never cautious about. Number one, no one sits down to come up with a system that doesn't generate them profit. It has to happen so for them to sustain their businesses. And I think based on, the article I was actually talking about, there was something that the company was so much interested in, and that was, us, keeping that close connection, and keeping the client on the other side engaged to the machine. And those users are actually paying for that service, because why would a company even go to an extent of providing pornographic stickers to you? It means they understand the need, first of all, of their potential, let me say, or other target customers. So for them to come up with such, they do an analysis of everything, and they really establish, the needs of, their potential clients or customers. And after doing that, they know how to, pick them to the screen. And then also, I believe everyone loves sex. I do love sex too. So anytime you're engaging someone in such an intimate conversation, they will still, stick to that, conversation. And that is what they're actually doing. Because I kept on asking myself, why would such a company, sit down and generate pornographic stickers for conversations? That means they understood the needs of their clients. So there is an analysis phase of everything, and there is the creation phase of everything, and there is, the implementation of it. Then all these things are designed to generate income. And so there is nothing like, any system trying, or rather being created just for, and there is a reason as to why there are NDAs for that matter. It's because they want to protect all these. They want to ensure that no one knows what is happening. No one questions certain decisions they make. And no one speaks about, what is happening to the outside world. So it's very strategic, and these people are making millions, trust me. Yeah.
Perfect. We've got a question here, please.
Hello, good morning, and thank you to Alan for letting us all join each other in this amazing space. So my question is about attachment hacking, based on the premise that if social media hacked our attention over the last 10 years, will AI be hacking our attachments to each other, to our families, to our communities, and what is that process like? Or it's kind of a question for everybody.
And before the panel takes the question, can we get the mic here to this woman just to take a second question? Right here in the middle table, front middle table. We'll just cluster. So we've got attention hacking, attachment hacking, and very briefly.
Hi, I'm Svetlana Hoon. I worked for a social robotics company that is making social robots for autistic children. And the recent idea is to put LLMs into those robots to make conversations more fluent. So I would like to know what you think about that.
LLMs in social robots for autistic children. Panel. Attachment hacking.
Yeah. I haven't heard of that one before.
One of my colleagues, Jakob Choudhury, who's at the Center for the Future of Intelligence, he and his colleague, Johnny Penn, are arguing that it's in a way intention hacking. So intention, if you define it philosophically, intention is choice plus commitment. And commitment is how far we're able to go out of our comfort zones to sort of stay with a plan or a vow or a promise. So I guess the idea, and I'm not sure it's a square-on answer, but just I'm aware that there's new research going on what are the implications as we're more integrated into these the LLM models to just interface with AI with our personal laptops, that they're reading every time that we have some kind of an intention, and it may end up sort of eroding our ability to express ourselves with intention. But it's not a very concrete answer because it's ongoing research.
Tilo?
Yeah, I think it's probably more difficult to hack attachment than attention, I would roughly say, but certainly there's this risk there because I guess AI can deliver certain things that human beings are maybe worse in, always be available, always be attentive, always be confirming, that can be, that could be attractive in certain situations, right? So in that sense, there is maybe a risk, a certain vulnerability there, but what I currently see is also certain more critical thinking towards the virtual, towards big tech in society. I would rather predict more like people start to value more true human, authentic relationships, human manufactured things, these kind of things. So the human-rooted things in general, I think, especially when AI becomes more dominant in the future. That's my prediction.
Let's leave the last 100 seconds on this panel to the panelists to kind of follow Tilo either in a prediction or a call to action. So, that the human and the human-made are going to become more valuable, ironically, in this. Others? Joe? What do you want to leave with the audience today?
Well, just real quick on power and the autism research. I mean, just to be clear, my problem is not with AI. It's with the people who are developing AI and how they're using it. And going back to the Human Genome Project, we used that for gene therapy. We could have used it for eugenics. So I think there are perfectly legitimate applications of this new technology, but like any other therapeutic intervention, we would want to do clinical trials, test for safety, test for harms, get scientists and physicians and those sorts of folks working with that population to develop them, not just ceding power to the companies to do it on their own for profit.
I think that's a great call to action. Jaime?
I would love to talk with you after. My highest level takeaway is, my prediction is that human-machine relations will emerge as a preference. So get used to it and let's figure it out. And outside of that, more generally, I think it's dangerous for us to disclose or rather foreclose on questions about sociality, about mind, about relationships. Let's not ignore them or brush them aside as invalid, but work to understand them.
Michael, last call to action, 10 seconds to this audience.
Okay, I think I would address something on emotional hacking, which raises deeper concerns for me, and that revolves around attention manipulation, and basically, if you look at it from a wider perspective, you'll notice that it actually commodifies human feelings. Number one, then number two, it can actually erode authentic relationships. And one person, if he told me you love me, I really question a lot because I've told more than enough people that I love them when I didn't. So to some extent, I don't believe in the word love. Not to sound a bit skeptical about it, but I find it hard to believe it when someone tells me they love me. And more so if it's coming from, let me say, from an online view, let's say like WhatsApp or any other communication platform online, I find it a bit hard to believe that you're telling me the truth. Then also it risks, the psychological harm, which I believe, especially for vulnerable individuals. So it also blurs generally the boundary between genuine connections and engineered illusion. And we believe, we are better positioned to actually give this feeling real time and now trying to create an illusion of it.
Yes. And 10 seconds.
Just limit the personal pronoun I to people with birth certificates. And with Jaime, if we're going to flourish with machine relationships, let's call it out and say it is human-machine relationships.
That has been so interesting. I've learned so much. Will you join me in thanking our panel?